Look down at your plate tonight. Chicken, beef, maybe fish. Now imagine that same plate, 10,000 years ago. Beetles, grubs, ant larvae, still glistening, locusts, roasted whole. You would have eaten it, and you would have asked for more. Because for most of human history, insects weren't a punishment. They weren't a dare on a reality show. They were dinner. Somewhere along the way, we forgot that. We built a wall between food and bug, and we forgot we ever built it. Tonight, we're going to tear that wall down, brick by brick, and follow the trail backward, through kitchens, through empires, through caves, to the moment our ancestors first looked at a squirming grub and thought, survival. Why did we stop eating something that once kept us alive? And why, right now, all over the world, are we quietly starting again? Let's go back, way back, 2 million years ago, before fire, before spears, before language as we know it. A small band of hominins moves across the grasslands of southern Africa. They are not the strongest animals on this landscape. They are not the fastest. They do not yet know how to bring down a large antelope with any reliability. But they know something the lions don't care about. They know where the termite mounds are. At a site called Swartkrans in South Africa, archaeologists found something strange among the bones of ancient prey animals. Old, worn animal bones, but not shaped like tools for cutting meat, shaped like tools for digging. The wear patterns on their tips matched something very specific, the act of breaking into termite mounds, again and again, over thousands of years. This is not a guess pulled from nowhere. It's physical evidence, the kind you can hold in your hand, catalogued, studied under a microscope. It suggests that early hominins were engineering tools for one purpose: to reach the soft, protein-rich insects hiding inside those hardened towers of earth. Termites don't run, they don't fight back. They don't require a hunting party, a strategy, or a weapon that could kill you if you missed. A mound of termites is a vending machine that never says no. For a small-bodied, slow, unarmed primate trying to survive on the African savanna, that mattered more than pride ever could. Some researchers who study human evolution, including biological anthropologist Julie Lesnick, who has spent years researching this exact question, argue that insects may have made up a significant portion of the diet of our early ancestors, long before organized hunting became reliable. It's a theory, built from bones, tools, and the behavior of our closest living relatives. Because here's the thing, we don't have to imagine what our ancestors might have eaten. We can watch it happening right now. Chimpanzees, our closest living relatives, still do this today. They strip twigs into tools, poke them into termite mounds, and pull them out coated in insects. Scientists call it termite fishing. It is one of the most studied examples of tool use in the animal kingdom, and it is, quite simply, insect harvesting. If our closest relatives do it, if early hominins built tools that match the exact wear pattern of doing it, then the picture starts to form. Not a certainty, but a very compelling thread, and that thread doesn't end in the grasslands of Africa. It follows us everywhere we went next. Fast forward. Tens of thousands of years. Ice covers much of the northern hemisphere. Humans, now fully modern, fully us, are painting on cave walls. Deep inside a cave called Altamira in northern Spain, alongside the famous bison and horses that made this site legendary, there are smaller, quieter images. Some researchers who have studied the art at Altamira point to what appear to be bees and wild bee nests worked into the wall alongside the animals our ancestors are known to have hunted. Nearly 2,000 kilometers away, in a cave in France called Les Trois Frères, hunters some 17 to 12,000 years ago left behind images long interpreted by some archaeologists as insects, sitting on the walls beside the great mammoths and bison that usually dominate Ice Age art. Why would a culture obsessed with painting the animals it depended on for survival, bison, horses, deer, also take the time to paint something as small as a bee's nest? One possibility researchers have raised, because it wasn't small to them. A wild bee nest wasn't just honey, it was fat-rich larvae. It was protein when the mammoth hadn't been found in weeks. It was food security painted onto stone. This is where honesty matters. Insect bodies are fragile. They don't fossilize the way bones do. A saber-tooth's jaw can survive 50,000 years in the right soil. A beetle's shell almost never does. So, archaeologists searching for proof of ancient insect eating face a strange problem. The evidence keeps disappearing. But every so often, it survives in the one place you'd least expect: fossilized feces. Scientists call them coprolites, and they are exactly what they sound like: ancient human waste, mineralized and preserved for thousands of years. In caves across the United States, including Lovelock Cave in Nevada, and in sites across Mexico, researchers have opened up these coprolites and found something remarkable inside: the wings, legs, and body casings of insects. Undigested, unmistakable. One coprolite, roughly 10,500 years old, contained a striking concentration of beetle remains, enough that some researchers believe it points not to accidental ingestion, but to deliberate, targeted harvesting. Someone, in a moment of hunger or habit, ate a meal that was mostly beetles. And then, without knowing it, left the proof behind for 10,000 years. It is not glamorous evidence, but it may be some of the most honest evidence archaeology has ever produced. You cannot fake what's inside a 10,000-year-old coprolite. It simply is what it is. So by the end of the Ice Age, across 2 different continents, we have tools built for harvesting insects, cave art that may depict them as food, and fossilized proof that people were, in fact, eating them. 3 separate threads, all pointing the same direction. But here's where the story gets more complicated and more interesting. Move forward again. Anatomically modern humans have now spread deep into Europe, arriving at least 46,000 years ago, and in 2026, a team of researchers at the Institute of Evolutionary Biology in Barcelona decided to test something nobody had directly tested before. Not campfire remains, not cave paintings, teeth. Specifically, dental calculus, the hardened plaque that builds up on teeth over a lifetime and traps tiny fragments of DNA from whatever a person regularly ate. The team analyzed 745 samples from individuals dating back as far as 33,000 years. And the results challenged the story we thought we knew. Across northern Eurasia, the DNA evidence suggested that modern humans did not regularly eat insects as a dietary staple. What little insect DNA researchers did find looked incidental: insects swallowed by accident, through contaminated water or food, not deliberately hunted and prepared as a meal. There was something else, too. When the researchers examined the genes responsible for digesting chitin, the tough material that makes up an insect's exoskeleton, they found that populations in northern Eurasia carried mutations linked to a reduced ability to break it down. In other words, for at least some ancient European populations, in at least this window of time, bugs may not have been a regular part of dinner at all. This doesn't erase everything that came before it. It complicates it. Science rarely hands us a single clean answer. It hands us layers, new evidence sitting on top of old evidence, sometimes agreeing, sometimes not. What seems most likely, based on everything gathered so far, is this: insect eating was not one universal human behavior, practiced identically everywhere for all of history. It was regional. It came and went depending on climate, geography, and what other food was available. In colder northern climates, where large game was abundant and insects were seasonal and scarce, humans may have leaned away from them. In warmer regions, where insects swarmed in predictable massive numbers, they may have leaned in, hard. And nowhere is that lean-in more documented than in the deserts of the Near East and the ancient kingdoms that rose around them. Roughly 3,000 years ago, in the palaces of ancient Assyria, stone reliefs were carved, showing servants carrying skewers of locusts toward a royal feast. This is not myth. This is not folklore passed down through storytelling. It is carved in stone, on the walls of Nineveh, meant to be seen for generations. Locusts, prepared and served, fit for a king's table. Around the same era, in the Near East, some of the earliest written references to insect eating begin to appear, locusts specifically, a food source that had one enormous advantage: predictability. When locust swarms descended on a region, they arrived by the millions. For ancient economies without refrigeration, without steady trade routes, without guaranteed harvests, a locust swarm wasn't a plague. It was an emergency food supply, falling from the sky. Centuries later, in ancient Greece, the philosopher Aristotle, a man who spent his life cataloging the natural world with obsessive precision, turned his attention to insects too. In his work Historia Animalium, he didn't just mention eating insects in passing, he documented them. He described the different life stages of certain insects and noted which stage tasted best. Aristotle, one of the most influential minds in human history, wrote about insects the way a modern food critic might write about seasonal seafood. Rome inherited some of that appetite. In the satirical novel The Satyricon, the writer Petronius describes a lavish, over-the-top feast hosted by a wealthy character named Trimalchio, a meal designed to show off status and excess. Among the dishes, roasted beetles, not survival food, luxury food, a display of wealth for guests who could afford anything. Halfway across the world, in Tang Dynasty China, between the 7th and 10th centuries, a cookbook laid out specific preparations for wasp larvae and pupae, a culinary tradition, documented in writing, treated with the same seriousness as any other ingredient. Notice the pattern: Africa, Europe, the Near East, Asia. Different continents, different centuries, different languages, and yet, again and again, the same basic idea keeps appearing. Insects as food. Not as an oddity, not as a last resort, sometimes, as at Trimalchio's table, as a luxury reserved for the wealthy. So somewhere between ancient Rome and your dinner table tonight, something shifted. And it shifted hard. The turn began, historians believe, sometime after the 1st century BC in the Western world. As cities grew and agriculture and organized farming spread, insects increasingly came to be seen not as food, but as the enemy of food, the thing that destroyed crops, spoiled grain stores, and spread disease. The very creatures once served at royal tables were now the reason a harvest failed. Then came an encounter that would harden this shift into something closer to prejudice. When Europeans began exploring and colonizing the Americas, they encountered indigenous peoples who ate insects as a regular, valued part of their diet. Rather than recognizing a sophisticated, sustainable food tradition, many European observers viewed it through the lens of their own assumptions, using insect eating as supposed evidence of primitiveness, a way to justify seeing these societies as lesser. It's an uncomfortable thread in this story, but an important one. The retreat of insect eating in the West wasn't purely about taste or nutrition. It became tangled up with ideas about civilization, status, and who got to decide what counted as proper food. And yet, even as insects vanished from most European tables, they never disappeared from the wider world. Not even close. Scattered records throughout the Middle Ages and beyond tell us the practice simply moved to the margins of European memory, while continuing to thrive elsewhere. In the 16th century, a writer named Leo Africanus documented nomadic peoples in Arabia and Libya eating cooked and dried locusts as an ordinary part of desert life. In the 18th century, a French writer described watching people across Asia, Africa, and the Arab world eat grilled locusts, and noted, almost with surprise, that they tasted something like shrimp. That comparison matters more than it seems. Shrimp are arthropods. Insects are arthropods. On a biological level, the line between food and bug was always thinner than most cultures wanted to admit. So where does that leave us now? Today, researchers estimate that roughly 2 billion people around the world still practice entomophagy, the deliberate eating of insects, as a normal part of their diet. More than 2,000 species of edible insects have been documented across over 100 countries, concentrated heavily across tropical and subtropical regions of Asia, Africa, and Latin America. For a huge portion of the human population, this story never actually ended. It just kept going, quietly, while the West looked away. And now, the West is starting to look back. Nutritionally, the case is almost embarrassingly strong. Edible insects can offer protein levels comparable to or higher than conventional meat by weight, along with essential amino acids, healthy fats, and micronutrients like vitamin B12, iron, and zinc. Environmentally, raising insects for food requires a fraction of the land, water, and feed that livestock demands, with a dramatically smaller carbon footprint. As the planet faces a growing population and a shrinking margin for environmental error, researchers studying food security have started pointing back at insects, not as a novelty, but as a genuine part of the answer. Which brings us to the strange shape of this entire story. We didn't start eating insects because we were desperate and primitive. We started because insects were reliable, abundant, and nutritious, a smart evolutionary strategy from a species that hadn't yet mastered hunting large animals. We kept eating them, in some cultures, as delicacies fit for emperors and philosophers. We stopped, in others, not entirely because of taste, but because of shifting economics, agriculture, and prejudice dressed up as progress. And now, standing in the 21st century, staring down a future of climate strain and food insecurity, some of the sharpest scientific minds on the planet are looking at the exact same solution our ancestors stumbled onto 2 million years ago at a termite mound in South Africa. Maybe the question was never, why did ancient humans eat bugs to survive? Maybe the real question is, why we ever convinced ourselves we were too advanced too. The termite mound is still standing. The mound never changed. We did.